morning, and welcome to today's Spouse Link live stream. I'm Anna Larson. Military spouses are familiar with change. We weather the ups and downs with resolution and resiliency, knowing that someday it's all going to be over and the next phase of our life is going to begin back in the civilian world. Well, now you're there. You're getting ready. It's a couple years before. You're right at that point where that DD-214 is becoming a reality. You've arrived at that time where that transition out of active duty and into the civilian lifestyle is going to be happening. So why aren't you feeling like it's everything you've ever wanted? When you're nearing transition and retirement, the opportunities are very big and bright and shiny. But military spouses can often feel an overwhelming sense of loss and fear that comes right along with that. You may find that the emotional toll is going to make it very hard to enjoy what should be the most exciting time for you and your family. So today, my guest, Brittany Chatman, is a military and veterans program manager for Given Hour. Given Hour creates resilient communities by improving mental health and emotional well-being 1 hour at a time. We're going to talk a little bit more about what that means and what is available for military spouses. But thank you for joining me today for this Spouse Link live stream. As I said earlier, I'm Anna Larson. I'm a Spouse Link ambassador for transitioning and retiring military families. I'm also a copywriter and a digital marketer by trade. I'm a homeschool mom, and I'm a retired military spouse as of just a little over a year. So these live streams are really for military spouses that are looking for connection and for support as they near or cross over into that transition timeframe. And our conversation today with Brittany is really going to touch on some of those hot topics, especially the emotional toll of transition and retirement. So without further ado, let me pull up Brittany's bio. I'm going to add myself over here. Okay. So with more than a decade of public health experience, Brittany Chatman is poised to continue her quest to promote, protect, and improve the health of communities that she serves. Her efforts include targeted strategies in public health, promotion, education, and evaluation, through which she has aided in the creation and implementation of sustainable interventions on local, statewide, regional, and national levels. So this guest today, she knows what she's doing. Brittany possesses a Bachelor's of Science in Public Health with a concentration in Sociology and a Master's of Health Administration with a concentration in Education. She also possesses a graduate certificate in Public Management. She's a certified Everything Disc Workplace Facilitator. Her expansive repertoire of issue-specific training enables her to deepen the knowledge base of those around her, influencing a lasting impact on their individual and collective culture attributes. So if that doesn't tell you, I'm excited. Let's just say I'm super excited to bring her on. So let me pull this back down and let me bring on Brittany. Hi.
Hi. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I am well. I'm well.
I'm so glad to hear that. Welcome to, what is in Texas, a very rainy, stormy day. So I told Brittany this behind the scenes, but I'm going to just throw it out there for everyone else. If for some reason it continues to storm and my internet goes out, I apologize. I'm so sorry. But we'll figure it out, right? So, but I'm giving a heads up. It's kind of like the forewarning just in case kind of thing. So, okay. So Brittany, I just read this big long bio, but can you tell us a little bit about yourself and like why you're the perfect person for this conversation?
Oh my gosh, perfect. This is so much pressure. Number one, other than all of the other things that you shared, thank you for that. I'm also a retired military spouse. My husband served in the Air Force for 20 years. He retired in 2019. So in the work that I do at Given Hour, I have a professional interest, a personal interest, and everything in between. And on top of that, I also serve as a regional health and wellness committee chair for my sorority, Sigma Gamma Rho Sorority Incorporated. And 12 hours ago, I was not in the rain. I was actually in the snow in Indianapolis celebrating our 100th Founders Day. So I'm glad to be back in Florida where it's hot.
Yeah, I'll bet. You go from cold to hot. I love that.
I hope I don't get a cold.
Well, Brittany, we're super excited to have you on today. For anyone that's just tuning in or listening, this is the Spouse Link live stream about emotional toll of transition and retirement. We're specifically going to be talking about an organization called Give an Hour that Brittany is their military and veteran specialist for this program. But before we dive into that, if you are listening, drop us a little comment. Tell us where you're coming in from. If you have some specific questions, we'd love to hear from you. These live streams are meant to be interactive. We welcome the comments, the questions, the people. So would love to have you on. Okay, so let's dive into our very first question. And this is really about the words emotional toll. So when we talk about emotional toll, what exactly does that mean? I mean, what are the signs, or first of all, the definition, but also the signs that someone's feeling that emotional distress?
I'm so glad you asked that. And not just because I'm part of the Give an Hour team, but we have actually curated a tool that we encourage everyone to access. It's called the 5 Signs of Emotional Suffering. And what they are, just to list them very quickly, are personality change, agitation, withdrawal, poor self-care, and hopelessness. Now, mind you, these 5 signs, they are signs of emotional suffering in general. So we absolutely don't want anyone to kind of take them or, weaponize them or even misconstrue them as signs of mental illness or poor mental health. It's really, they cut across several diagnoses. So they're not a diagnosis. And a lot of times when we are feeling what I like to refer to as away, right? Because sometimes we can't always put it into words. It's really nice to have a tool like the 5 signs of emotional suffering to put a name or a descriptor to that feeling. So those are what we refer to as the 5 signs of emotional suffering. Obviously, there are quite a bit of sub-signs if we wanted to break it down that way, whether it's frustration or anything like that. But as for us, we go with the 5 signs.
So I went ahead and on your website, this is the link, and I just dropped it into the comments, but this is the link where you can fill out the form that will essentially, the tool gets emailed to you from the Give an Hour program. But this will help you kind of determine what or if you are feeling in those moments, like Brittany was saying, like, give you some names to some of those emotions that you might be having right now. So if you're going through this, I'm curious, I didn't do it yet, but I'm going to just do it just because even a year out, there is still like things that we're dealing with now. I mean, it's not like the transition is over and done with and I'm like, woohoo, everything's great, right?
Yes, it's always continuing. I feel, it's just, what level have we gotten to today?
Yeah. So when you talk about the words emotional toll with someone, there's not really a one specific answer. I mean, it's all over the board, and it can go from everything from just something that you're thinking in your mind or something you can't let go of, or anger, or like all the emotions, right?
Right. Absolutely. I mean, and it can vary based on the day, if you're being honest. And as military spouses, we know that our spouses that have served have been through a lot, whether it was from a deployment, whether it was from a PCS, whether it was from the threat of a deployment. All of those things drum up a lot of emotions that are hard to put into words, even when you have a tool like the 5 signs, right? So as spouses, I know personally for me, I have gotten to a point to where I've taken on some of that because, we want everyone to feel good and we want to fix things and we want to make sure that at the end of the day, our spouse knows that they have that safe space at home. But there are times in doing that we can kind of neglect what we need to manage and keep in check in preparation for that transition before, during, and even after.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I love that answer. And I think one of the things that we struggle with the most is that word where they're like, you're supposed to be super resilient, right? That's what we feel. We've been told that for the 20 years or 5 years or whatever level of time frame you've been in the military. That's like military spouse equals resiliency, right?
Right.
I think that labeling makes us think I can't feel like this. I can't give up on this. I can't Like you can take a break, you can wallow for your day, but then you got to get up and you got to get going. And I think that that expectation is one where there can be some damage that happens to us as military spouses because we force ourselves to do things when maybe we truly are not emotionally capable of handling them at that moment.
Absolutely. And I think it's so important for us to separate resiliency in terms of maybe how DOD or the military looks at resiliency, and resilience in terms of the true definition. So resiliency as the construct or the concept, and then resilience as kind of like that state of being. And a lot of times, regardless of which one we are talking about, which version of the concept we're talking about, I think it's so important for people to remember that resilience is often born from adversity. So we have to be careful about how we applaud and glamorize resilience, if you will, because there's always a story behind that. So resilience is good in the moment, being able to bounce back, but what comes after that? What does the postvention looks like? What does the long-term self-care, emotional well-being plan looks like? What does that look like?
Oh
And I think that, once we kind of pick ourselves up, we wallow on our sorrows for a little bit, oh my God, this sucks. It's important to to after we're done kind of processing those feelings, formulate what that long-term plan looks like, formulate what our emotional well-being toolbox looks like. Find that therapist, find that counselor to make sure that while we're taking care of home, while we're taking care of our spouse, that we're making sure that we're taking care of ourselves first and foremost, because we can't pour from an empty cup, and we're no good to anybody else if we're not good to ourselves.
Oh my gosh. You really struck a chord when you just were saying, like, what's the long-term care plan? Like, what's the long-term emotional health? Like, that doesn't even factor, just like everything else when you're dealing with military life, there is no long-term plan because everything changes.
Yes.
Everything changes and it's short term. I mean, 2 years is not long term, right? Like a 2-year plan is not a long-term plan that's going to last because you don't know what your next PCS station is going to be. You don't. But now you're retiring or transitioning out, right? And now all of a sudden you're looking at a potential for a long-term living situation, which for me actually was terrifying. Like I was like, what if I hate the place we choose? And I had to completely shift my mindset into this is my forever for now home. This is my forever for now location. Like I had to remind myself constantly, like, this doesn't have to be forever. This can be just short term still. Even if the army doesn't move you, you can move yourself. You're capable of that, right?
Right.
Like going
where you put that.
Yeah. So anyway, I love that. So, okay. So for anyone listening right now, seriously, if you haven't thought through kind of like that whole idea of how resiliency and that long-term plan kind of meshes together, this is so good. Like just did like that could be a really good like journaling activity or just thought activity or self-care activity to say to yourself, what is my long-term care plan for myself? Like, what is it I'm doing constantly, regardless of where I live, regardless of the changes that happen? Anyway, I love that idea. I'm going to adopt it. I'm going to do something with it. I don't know what it is, but
and understand that it's okay if that plan has to change.
yes,
Because, mental health care, emotional well-being, all of that is nuanced and it can change from day to day. So building in enough flexibility and grace for yourself, if that plan has to change, that it doesn't feel like the world is ending.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, we're going to jump into the second question and we're going to talk specifically about that transition time frame. So here now you've got a military spouse and they're transitioning. And we're all resilient. We already talked about that, right? We can do this on our own, just like every other PCS move. We don't, there's nobody, we don't need any help. We're going to sort it out. Nothing will go as planned, but you know what? We'll be fine. But the reality is, and I mean, this is my personal story, right? But I think a lot of transitioning spouses find themselves in the same place. I had a massive, moment the day my spouse, we transitioned in 2021, so it was during COVID. So there was no retirement ceremony, there was no fanfare. He literally drove on to post and picked up the DD 214 in a package, and in there was the flag and the certificates for him and me, and that was it. And that was like the moment. That was goodbye,
Wow.
goodbye, 23 years of service, kind of thing. Like that was. But as he was driving to go get that, I had this this, I'm going to call it a breakdown because I don't know what other word to use it for. And it was over something silly. It was over the on post library. I'm like, I don't know if I can still use the on post library. And that question, not having the answer to that question, caused me to have like just floods of tears, and I'm not ready for this. And it really had nothing to do with the library at all. It was the floods of tears and I'm not ready for this. But what I didn't realize at that point was I mean, I was very lucky. I have a bestie here that she was right there on the phone, like, let's talk through this logically. Let's talk about the library. You know that there's 4 others in the community around you, right? Like just like logically taking me through that process. But that emotional support was something I really needed. So when you're talking to these transitioning spouses, and whether this is a 20-year spouse or a 4-year spouse, it doesn't really matter. Like, what kind of emotional support do you think they should be seeking out or looking for or asking for?
That is such a great question. And I will say, first and foremost, definitely connect with a mental health provider. I alluded to the fact that I take pleasure in fixing things. I've had to kind of reprogram my brain to recognize that the world is not going to end if I don't fix it. So because I've been so conditioned, right? Shocker! What a shocker! I've been so conditioned to have to fix all the things and do all the things.
Yeah,
I really neglected myself in the transition process. So 3 years later, knowing what I know now, what I really wish I knew then, and I hope to impart on everyone that's here and hopefully make your transition a little bit smoother.
Yeah.
That prioritize your mental health in this space, because a lot of times, and I can't speak for everyone's spouse, but that transition is very scary for the service member. I mean, it's scary for us as the spouses and the dependents, but in some cases, you know, mine did 20, yours did 23. That is about, depending on, you know, when they went in, is half of their adult life.
Yeah.
And all they've known, other than, you know, a sliver of the adult life that they had prior to, is military.
Yeah.
So that is terrifying, you know? And I think I actually kind of went about it the wrong way. I'm like, we have to go to family counseling and we all have to do this, and let's find a counselor and let's get a provider. And I was trying to orchestrate all these things while completely negating how terrifying this transition had to have been for my husband. So if I could go back and do it all over again, I would have started with myself first and kind of take some time to be a little bit more introspective about what I need to process the transition and what I may be up against. There has to be a better way to say that, but what I can better plan for as to family dynamics with the transition. Because in our particular situation, we wanted to stay retired in Florida. And you mentioned that 2 years really isn't a long time. That's about how much time we had left before 20 was coming. And then we got an assignment, and that kind of put a in our plans. So we decided to divide and conquer. So we went a couple of years with me and the kids here and my husband there. We were building a house and everything. And we just did not want to uproot everyone and everything, knowing that we wanted to stay here or ultimately come back here. So there was the retirement transition process happening. There was the family reintegration process happening, a full-time thing. You know, we had not been under the same roofs full-time for a while. So there's that aside from the military aspect of it. So I would definitely start with myself first. I would have started with myself first, just
Yeah.
so I could be equipped with the tools and the tips and the resources to kind of navigate that emotional journey, because it's easy to kind of take on the emotions and the vibes of what is happening around you. And I think having started the counseling process earlier and maybe even leading by example, because a lot of times they watch us. They won't admit that they watch us, but they do.
They totally do.
They do. You can ask them to do something and it's a no, but then they watch you do it. And it's like, well, maybe that's not that bad of an idea. So kind of modeling the behavior. I think if I could go back and do it again, I would have gone about it that way, so that it was not yet another thing that was being thrown into that state of uncertainty. So I would recommend that to everyone.
Yeah, I love that phrase you use, modeling the behavior, because I, very similar to you, that retirement came more because COVID hit and he didn't have to go into work for about 6 months, right? Called in every morning, got up at 5 a.m., ready to go in if needed, kind of thing, but, and they would make the couple of phone calls until they said, nope, don't come into work, don't come into work. And it was through that process where it was like, hey, I'm kind of enjoying not putting my boots on. Like, maybe it's time to consider this. So for us, it was very similar in that he come off a deployment, then COVID, like literally then COVID hit, came off the deployment. He was the last flight back in from Kuwait that they allowed back onto base before they closed down the airports because of COVID for like 2 more months. So it was the same thing, that family reintegration, the pandemic issue, and then hey, maybe I don't want to be in the service anymore, and me going, what are you talking about? Like, this is all we know. This is what we do. What are we going to do if we don't do this? Right? That military life.
Right.
And my focus became, what did he need to transition successfully? And I did not focus on what did I need to get him there. It was all about his transition, making sure it happened, because there's a lot of checklists and there's a lot of stuff. There's so many Foot Lockers in our garage, even still.
Same.
Right? I'm thinking like, oh my gosh, all that issue that he's going to have to go through, all the checklists, all the TAP program, all the this, all the that. And then add the complication of nobody's in the office and everything's closed because there's a pandemic happening, that then we had all these extra things that we were dealing with. But that all aside, that what you just said, though, modeling the behavior, there was none of that for me. It was, you need to do this because this will get you through your transition successfully, right? Because we military spouses are often you use the word orchestrate, right? That's what we do.
Yes.
Our homes. And that's how we survive, right? Is we create this like plan that's a ever-changing plan, but it's what gives us that little bit of control that we need to feel like we're not just living in constant chaos. So I love that. Like, I love that idea of modeling the behavior. And if that means finding a therapist for yourself and working through what transition means for you so that you're strong and capable and demonstrating to your spouse, hey, this is a good way forward. I love that so much. Thank you. That's a great suggestion.
I'm glad my lesson was not in vain.
No, absolutely not. And in fact, like, the next question I was going to ask you was actually like, what can a spouse do to prepare early for that emotional toll, right? Would you add anything to that, like to that step you just said about modeling the behavior and making sure you yourself are feeling strong?
I would, connections are important, right? So we're not in the Stone Ages anymore to where we're having to write letters. Regardless of my presentation, I have written letters with stamps and mailed them. And so we're no longer in the Stone Ages. There's text messages, there's FaceTime, WhatsApp, Zoom. We're doing this and you're not in the same room or even in the same state. So I think we really have a major advantage with technology. And to coupled with our 5 signs of emotional suffering, we have another tool that are the healthy habits of emotional well-being. And what one of those are is checking in, right? So we don't need to physically reach out and touch someone in order to maintain those relationships. We don't need to physically need to be sitting next to someone to maintain those relationships. It could be a phone call. It could be a monthly Zoom happy hour or book club if you like to have more of a dry time. So, whatever those things are, a text message group, a prayer circle, whatever it is that you feel like you need to maintain that sense of community, because community knows no bounds. So I would definitely work on solidifying those connections that you have, because in my particular situation, I was in Florida first. So I had my support network. I have family here. I have friends here. I have sorority sisters here. But had we retired in maybe Texas, I still would have had a lot of sorority sisters because we're nationwide, but I wouldn't have had the family that I have here. So I would have I would have probably gotten really lonely, So making sure that you know who your support network is, and tapping into that support network so that you have people that you can rely on for that connection. Because the counseling and the therapy is one thing, definitely not to diminish that at all, because it's highly important. But making and keeping those connections is key. It's really key, because you never know when you may need someone to talk to, especially if you're transitioning to a new state. We're getting into job searches, maybe, and those sorts of things. And when so many things are changing, whether it's right or wrong, it can be very overwhelming. And you really want to make sure that you have that safety net in your support circle to kind of carry you through and pick you up where you may stumble. So that's the other piece of advice that I would give, because it can be tough. It can be tough. And even though we didn't move, it was still tough for me. We were still physically here during the transition process, and I still needed to tap into my support network. So whether you're going somewhere, coming, or staying, support is key, leveraging that support system you have.
I would absolutely agree with that. I would even say I would just remind military spouses as they're transitioning out. Once a military spouse, always a military spouse. And just because you're not active duty does not mean that you can't attend military spouse functions. The spouses clubs are still open to you. That, those Facebook community groups are still available for you to tap into. Like, your community is still there. And if you find you don't have a community or they're not welcoming, you need to talk to me, because I'm going to find you a community that's going to work for you. Because I know that most military spouses groupings out there are so welcoming, and they would welcome you with open arms. So it doesn't have to be like, I remember when I retired, I was like, I live in one of the largest retirement areas that the Army has, Fort Hood, Texas area. Like, there's thousands of us that live here, but I couldn't tell you another retired military spouse anywhere I'm sure that there are probably 10 on my street, but I wouldn't know that, right? Like, you're in this weird place and you're like, how do I identify myself? How do I label myself now? Now I'm just Anna Larson. And do I even say anything about the military? I don't know, right? Like, it gets really hard and confusing, because when you're a military spouse, that's part of your identity of, yeah, I'm a military spouse, and that's why we're here at Fort Hood. Well, now I chose to be here at Fort Hood. So now what do I say about that, right? And so, anyway, I just want to encourage military spouses to remember that your military community doesn't have to go away just because you're transitioning. It's still there. And to rely on those networks and connections to find that community that you're looking for. And you never know what might come from that, right? So,
you're right.
Yes.
I scream from the mountaintops that I'm a military spouse. I even have love my airman shirt on always. I mean, we're in a military community too. We're not, our closest base is McDill, but I mean, wherever I go, I'm like, I'm a military spouse. Hey, I'm Brittany. Did you know I'm a military spouse? I'm proud.
Yes. And And honestly, like that service time, it's important to recognize this too, because what you were saying earlier about this transition being very scary and difficult for our service members, even though they act really tough, or they act like it's no big deal, or ooh, I've been just waiting for this moment to finally get out, right? Whatever that like behavior is that they're exhibiting,
Mm.
it's scary, right? A new job or no job, providing for the family still and having that requirement still there, not necessarily knowing all the answers anymore, not having somebody tell you what to do or not do every day, not having your routine anymore, having to change health care, dental care, vision care, nothing working the same as you've known it for literally sometimes decades. Like
Yes.
that was scary. And
Yeah.
so like just reminding ourselves that that community is still there for our spouses as well. It's going to be a little bit different because when you're not active duty, you are losing out on some programs. They're just literally not available to you, but it's still there as a community.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we have a comment that says, I used to run a program called Operation Purple Summer Camp Program and loved working. Yes, I do know about Operation Purple, actually. So Shane, thank you for jumping in and saying that, because I think that the family, like that transition process is huge for the whole entire family. I mean, we haven't even really touched on the kids, but we're going to get into that next, because we're going to talk next about what Give an Hour does. I mean, Brittany's given us some incredibly good information about just in terms of like recognizing emotional distress, recognizing what resiliency really might be for you, recognizing some things you can put in place to support yourself during transition. But now let's talk about one specific tool, Give an Hour. So can you tell us, how does Give an Hour support military spouses?
I would be delighted. So there's quite a bit of ways that we support. First and foremost, we do have our Access to Care leg of the program, our military and veterans program. I like to refer to it as our flagship program, if you will. It's really the primary reason why Give an Hour was founded back in 2005, to help meet the gaps that existed with service members' access to mental health care. So as it relates to military spouses, we have a network, a provider network of, a few thousand strong. I'm talking about 4,000 plus strong, of providers who volunteer to give an hour of their time to serve our most treasured asset, our military community. So for our spouses and even dependents that find themselves needing or wanting to explore a mental health care, we have these options that you see on the screen here. So sometimes people may not necessarily be ready to explore counseling, the stage of change that they're in. They might just be in that pre-contemplation stage. Like, am I coming? Am I going? I'm not sure. Do I want to meet somebody? Do I want to tell my business? They're kind of like in that space, because let's face it, the stigma is still out there, even though we're working tirelessly to make it go away. It still kind of tugs at you sometimes. So we have resiliency and education, whereas people can kind of look into some self-help resources to kind of get a better idea of what mental health really is and what do you do with it. Because a lot of times when people think of mental health, they really only think of it when it's bad, but it can be good as well. It's like our physical health. When we talk about physical health, it's not always, bad or disease ridden. Sometimes we're fine. So the same applies to mental health. So when we talk about the resiliency and education, the 5 signs of emotional suffering are under there. The healthy habits of emotional well-being are under there. We have some really great resources for our young people so that they can kind of get a better understanding of how to navigate those emotions. Yes, thank you for pulling this up. We have it segmented by the basics, injustice and trauma focus, all the way down to military and veteran focus. And then, of course, we have some things for our youth and mental health professionals, because therapists need therapists too. So this is one of the areas where people can come if they're kind of wanting to just figure out who we are, what we're about, and what we're talking about, and to get a better idea of what they may want to do. So as you see here, we have some really great resources for the kids. I personally have been dying to use this with my daughter. She's a little bit of a techie though, so if I can digitize it, I'll probably get more of a response from her. But these are just some of the things that we have that are open and available to anyone who wants them. You can download it in a PDF or I want to say we have it in a JPEG file, not a PNG. And so access to care. If we could, yes, thank you. Mm-hmm. It's so nice and I have to not roll myself. So in the middle, we have crisis and navigation consultation. Now we have mental health providers that our service members, vets, and spouses and loved ones can access. However, when it comes to crisis care, we do not provide crisis emergency care. And the way I explain that is that if I were to break my foot, sure, my PCM may be able to help me, but that type of injury, that type of situation is better suited for an emergency room or urgent care, or maybe even, orthopedic surgeon, right? So by going to my PCM, I would be delaying access to a more appropriate setting for care. And the same applies with mental health care. If we have someone who is in crisis or exhibiting signs of crisis, if they're actively suicidal with a plan that is in motion, could a therapist or a counselor help? Probably, right? Because they have the tools, they have the educational background, but is that the most appropriate setting? Yeah. Not so much. So at that point, we're talking about whether it's inpatient care, emergent care, those sorts of things to make sure that we can get that client to care that is most appropriate for them without delaying that access. And that brings me to mental health counseling. So this is one of my favorite parts of our Access to Care program, where we have that provider network that I mentioned earlier, and individuals who are seeking care can search for a provider that they can connect to. Our whole goal with this aspect of our program is increasing barrier-free access to mental health care for military service members, veterans, and loved ones that have been affected by their service members' service. So an example of that, that relation between the service and the mental health concern would be what I brought up earlier. The family separation and reintegration, the transition, all of that is directly related to the service. And excuse me. And when we talk about barrier-free access, what that can look like is either pro bono counseling for individuals that have no insurance. It could look like a sliding scale fee for individuals who maybe have insurance or they're not able to afford a copay or maybe a full-fledged counseling fee. Or we also have the ability for individuals to use health insurance if they have it and they have the ability to do so. And with how that works is we basically function as a navigator, a navigation effort, if you will, to get individuals connected to the care that they need.
Yeah. So if you're a military spouse interested in accessing this, what's your first step? Go to the website and click on that. Is there a phone number that they should be calling? Any of the above, just, based on kind of like, what's that process look like for a spouse that might say, I would like to access this, but I'm still nervous about, what am I going to have to pay? I don't have a lot of money. What do I do if, that kind of a thing?
So what that looks like is you go to giveanhour.org /military, and that will bring you to this page that we're on right now. And when we get here, we'll scroll down, and where we see mental health counseling, we will click search for a provider. And when we click search for a provider, that will.
Oh, it moved to. Hold on. I gotta reshare a different screen.
Oh, okay. I'm like, what happened? I know it works.
I know it opened up onto a different screen. So here, let me pull this one up. Chrome tab. Make sure I'm getting the right one.
Gotta love technology.
Right.
Okay. It's like these computers are so smart, but how do you not know I want to share this screen?
There we go. Right. You're making my job hard for me right now.
Come on, computer. So when you click search for a provider, that will take you to this page. And as you see at the top, we have the descriptor of who can access the services. So military veterans and loved ones affected by time in service. And we talk about really how our provider network supports our priority population with those significant barriers to care. So I am so glad that we had this chat when we are having it now, because we spruced up our website a little bit to make things a little bit easier to find.
Really nice.
Aligned.
It's easy to navigate. I highly recommend people just going to take a peek at it. It's really like, if you're interested in accessing these services, it's so easy to get what you need.
Thank you so much. Do you hear that, team? Because I know they're watching.
Well done, team. Well done.
So what will happen here is we'll proceed with the steps for care. So you can search for a provider and make the referral. So we can use any zip code that you like to kind of just demo this if you want. I always use 32818 because that's where Mickey Mouse lives. But we can choose any zip code that you like. That's Florida. And then what we do is we always recommend that the distance be set to no preference. And the reason being is that, again, we live in the golden age of technology, and many individuals are seeking care, whether it's mental health, physical health, virtually, because that reduces barriers to having to go into the office. I know it has saved me many a times to not have to leave, and I don't really like to go outside. So when you set it to no preference, that makes sure that the provider that is available in the state, it will allow the search to span across the entire state, as opposed to if I put 15 miles, within 15 miles of the 32818 zip code, it will likely only generate me providers that reside or have their location as within that zip code. So that would rule out providers that are in Miami or Tallahassee or Jacksonville that may be able to provide virtual services. So we always want to make sure we set that to no preference. Under meeting format and gender, we typically recommend leaving those blank as well, because sometimes, the more criteria you put, it can actually drastically reduce the returns that the search yields. So if it's not an absolute must-have that, the prospective client doesn't mind kind of sorting through, we recommend leaving that blank. Now, for practice area, if it's something very, very specific, like, for example, marital counseling or adolescent or youth counseling, or even caregiver support, let's go with marriage and couple counseling.
I love this list, by the way. It is extensive.
We even have agoraphobia on there. I don't know if we've had anyone actually select that. I do agree that spiders are terrifying, but we have it there for people who may need that.
That's amazing. I love that.
Thank you. So now you can see, based on marriage and couples counseling, we have 64 providers in the state of Florida that are showing as available. If someone wants to see specifically who is in their area, what we recommend is hovering over to the distance column and clicking that, because it will actually, it will sort the list in order to see who's closest. And then you'll also see what I was referring to earlier, where we have Jacksonville, Wellington. Those places are not close to 32818, but they provide virtual counseling, and that's why you see they popped up at the top. But then when we get into Winter Park, Orlando, Maitland, those are all very close to the 32818 Orlando zip code. So what you can do now is you can actually select one of these if you want to kind of take a look at what happens next. We're not going to go through all of this, but you can see the other areas that this provider specializes in, right? And we also see this provider does not have format of counseling, but typically most of our providers, a good portion of our providers, do virtual counseling. So, and if you want to see it specifically, you can actually go back one and you can select in the checkboxes phone and video. And then you'll see what pops up there. There we go. So see, now we have quite a bit of providers who are indicating that they have phone and video. I know it doesn't show here, but because they popped up in that search, it shows that that's what they do. We can break it down by language, ethnicity, when the provider does indicate that. And of course, accept the insurance types. They have pro bono sessions, so that is what they're prioritizing for their given hour provider profile. Once you click next, which we don't have to, but once you click next, because we do have a video tutorial that everyone could watch at their convenience, you can go through the process and indicate everything that we're asking. We collect very limited information, to, of course, preserve that confidentiality, but give just enough that the provider knows what that prospective client is navigating and how best they may or may not be able to assist them.
Yeah. So when you see that pro bono session on there, that means that you can take at least 1 hour of this provider's time to at least start to address some of the emotional distress topics that maybe that you're having in that moment. And you know that this is a service that you can follow up with them on this first, second session if you want, and or they can refer you maybe to something else if there's more support that's needed, or kind of give you just like, well, I mean, what is therapy for, right? It's to provide you that space to have that open conversation and find that support that you're looking for, whatever that might mean for you as an individual.
Right.
So I love this. When I heard about this program, I was like, man, that morning my spouse went into his DD-214 to pick that up. This is where I could have gone, right? Like set myself up, or actually probably should have done it before that actual moment, but could have really found like that support that maybe I needed in that moment. I got very fortunate in that my friend was available to talk to me and talk me through that situation. You know, if she hadn't been there, what would that have looked like for me?
Right. It's not too late. It's not too late. I know the transition has happened, but as I mentioned in the beginning, it almost feels like it never ends. There's levels to it. And sometimes you might regress, sometimes you might progress a little bit faster. So even though you hadn't found us yet, it's never too late. Yeah. It's never too late. And I say that to all of the spouses that are out there.
Yeah. So just a couple of things to kind of recap what Brittany and I have discussed today. I do want to throw this up there. I did throw it there earlier, but if you are in crises, please call 988. That is the 3-digit number that's going to take you for suicide crises or emotional distress crises. It's the number to call if you are needing immediate support. Please don't be afraid to use this number. I'll throw that out there always and forever. Please call the number. The second thing is we threw up the givenhour.org. The resources, of course, is like that secondary link that you can go to find all of those things that Brittany has talked about that are available through Given Hour to provide. And then if you are nearing transition and maybe just need that moment to kind of like, so often we just say to ourselves, I'm fine. I'm going to be fine, right? It's okay to just say, even if you're fine. And this is one of the things I loved about what Brittany just said. Even in good health, we need to check up, right? We need to have a checkup, even if we're in good health. So even if you're saying, I'm fine, you might find that having someone to spend an hour with, to have a conversation with, maybe shed a few tears, maybe feel a little angry, maybe bash your spouse a little bit because they're not doing X, Y, Z. Maybe your frustration with the military service that you're in because everything's in an uproar and nobody's getting back to you about this. And don't they know I only have 3 weeks left, right? Those emotions, when they come strong. So I just highly recommend like checking into Given Hour, finding more about their program. I'm going to throw this up. Somebody from your team dropped this in the comments. So to learn more about them, go visit givenhour.org/military. Highly recommend it. And we're going to actually, I'm going to throw up right here. Oh, you know what? Before we do this, I have one last question for you. Wait, yeah. I got to do this one last question. So what's the one piece of advice you would give a transitioning military spouse?
Ooh, that's such a good one.
Right? I mean, you've been there, done that. So
the one piece of advice. Hmm. You are not responsible for fixing what you didn't break.
Ooh, I love that. That's so good. Yes. Oh, that means so many things in so many different areas, doesn't it?
Yes. Whether
Sounds
it's a long line at the ID card office, whether it's, you thought you had a little bit longer until your card expired,
yeah.
whether it's because someone else is not doing what they're supposed to do and that has put your house in turmoil. You are not responsible for fixing what you did not break. Do not take it on unnecessarily. Don't take it on.
Yeah. I love that. I love that advice. I highly recommend following it. Yeah, look, Shane says great advice. Transition must be intense and difficult. It is. It is intense and it can be very difficult, which is why SpouseLink is bringing these kinds of programs to your attention, just so that you know that they're there and you know they're out there. I mean, when Brittany and I started talking, I'm like, how do people not know this is available? This needs to be front and center for military spouses, especially ones where they're like, I don't have time to set up therapy. I don't have time to do this. This is what gives you the time, is a program like this. So thank you so much for sharing about Give an Hour. Now let's go to your contact information. Tell us how we can find you if somebody here wants to connect with you further or reach out to Give an Hour.
Sure. So all of these things, I'm doing this like you all can see me doing this on the screen, but I'm on LinkedIn. Give an Hour is on LinkedIn. You can find us on the World Wide Web at giveanour.org. For us specifically, you would want to put that /military. That'll get you right to where you're looking to be. We're on all the social medias, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I think we have a YouTube as well. No, I'm sure we have a YouTube. And for referrals, if you have questions about referrals or access to care, this one is really easy. So it is referrals@giveanour.org. And that is where you can ask any questions. If you find that you're having a difficult time navigating the site or just any specific eligibility questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us there. More likely than not, you'll get me. Surprise. Referrals@giveanour.org.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brittany. I really appreciate that information. Don't be afraid to reach out to her. She's on here because she is available. This is what she does. This is what she loves. This is her passion. This is her inspiration. So please don't hesitate. I know, what you were saying earlier, there is a stigma with mental health care. It needs to be erased and gone. So please reach out if you feel like this would be something that would help you through that transition or retirement timeframe. I know it would have me. And like you said, like, it's not too late, right? I mean, I'm only 18-ish months out, so it's still there. And I love this part, like anyone affected by a service member's service.
The loved ones.
It's not just military spouse. If your child needs this,
Exactly.
if your spouse's mother needs this,
the effects are so long reaching. I mean, it can transcend so many different levels of life, from best friends to cousins to great grandmas. I mean, it permeates everything. So we want to make sure that the individuals that have been affected can get the help that they need, because it's there, but it's no good if it's not being used.
Yes. Thank you. That's a great thing to end on. It's no good if it's not being used. So go out and use it if you need it. All right.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us on this SpouseLink live stream. Brittany, thank you so much for being an amazing guest and for giving us just all that great information on Give an Hour. As always, just as a reminder, SpouseLink is a program of AFMA, and AFMA started SpouseLink to help support, inform, and inspire military spouses around the world. So if you aren't familiar with AFMA or with SpouseLink, please go visit that link that is scrolling across the screen right now, afma.spouselink.org. SpouseLink.afma.com. Boy, that was all over the place wrong. spouselink.afma.com. And you can always reach out to me through LinkedIn, and or Spouse Link through Facebook, Instagram. Again, they're all the places as well. So please reach out if you have questions, if you have a topic in specifically that you'd like to hear about. Let me know, and maybe I can schedule it on one of our next Spouse Link live streams. So thank you again, Brittany. Thank you to everyone that joined us today, and we will see you in a couple of weeks.
Thank you, Emma. It was great.